everybody. Dave Costello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Firm Podcast. Today we have a really unique interview. It's a unique firm owner. His name is James Scott. He has over 20 professional years experience working within firms, including being a director at in Sydney, followed by 5 years in senior finance roles. Some very large firms. He then went on to found his own firm, J.D. Scott & Co., in late 2019, right before the pandemic. And we were just chatting before I hit record. I said, well, tell me a little bit about your firm. And he goes, well, we really hire part-time people. We don't think about full-time, we think about part-time. We don't have an admin person. I don't even own a printer. We've been remote from day one, and we've started to be able to scale up. And we'll dig into some of the revenue numbers here in a little bit. But I thought, goodness, isn't this the COVID or post-COVID story of how people are starting to think about firms and how the structure is changing? And so we're going to dig into those topics, how he manages those things, how he can operate without things like a printer or an admin support person, which is typically like the first hire we see a lot of firms make. But first, I just want to say, James, welcome to the show.
G'day, Dave. How you doing?
Good. Well, first and foremost, tell us a little bit about the firm in regards to what are you actually selling, what services do you provide, and then to the extent comfortable, whereabouts is your revenue and where do you expect it to be at the end of this year?
Yeah, no worries, Dave. And thanks for having me on too. It's a great pleasure. Yeah, we started the firm. I started the firm at the end of 2019. As you said, I've been in a few large corporate roles, took some time out and had a bit of a think about what I wanted to do with my life. Not quite a midlife crisis, but close enough to it. So and one thing I'd always enjoyed was helping small firms. Back at the start of my career, that's what I did. Worked in the SME space. So I launched the firm, and as you said, I come out of Big Four environment, out of Ernst Young as it was then when I started. And the disparity of the quality of advice that, say, the big end of town get and what small entities get was just mind-boggling to me. So I wanted to take that quality of advice and bring it to smaller firms. So our firm does two things. One is what I would term typical SME accounting and tax, and we provide a full suite of services to our clients, from bookkeeping and payroll through to tax compliance, tax planning, management support, from CFO advisory to that level of a business. And that's about, at the moment, about half, a bit over half our revenue. The other part of the firm we do is actually more small corporate advisory. This is coming out of my background working at EY and big corporates, where I help small corporates, say tech companies that are on the way to listing, with their financial reporting. And that's the other part of the firm as well. So most of the people, though, most of the action actually happens in the SME part of it, and the other side of it's the consulting advisory to accounting advisory, technical advisory to small corporate entities.
You're about 2 years in, and what's the revenue that you're looking at now?
Yeah, so on day one, we started, if you think back to 2019, here in Australia, was lots of bushfires. So I spent most of that summer, what was our summer, December, January, planning. I launched the firm at the end of March 2020. And I remember sitting literally in my, what was then my daughter's bedroom, overlooking our neighbor who's 96 and waving to her one morning on day one, and she woke back. And I had no revenue, no clients, and nothing to lose. So started busily marketing, doing the BD work. And so that was 2020.
And what does that mean, by the way, BD work? Are you calling people? Are you emailing?
Yeah, business development. Yeah, for me, it was anything. I've used Google Ads. I've used, my network is quite large. Getting to that, getting onto social media, you name it. We tried it to generate revenue.
Worked? Like I said, what worked the best? What worked the best in the beginning?
We have sites in Australia, and you might have them in America as well, like bark.com. And these are sites that people go to looking for an accountant, for example, or looking for a plumber, or looking for a lawyer. That worked well to start with because it was an audience of people who had small businesses in the main who were looking, or starting out, who were looking for an accountant at that point in time, as opposed to just fishing. So that was a fantastic tool. Now the hit rate's pretty bad because you're up against 3 or 4 other accountants, and the competition, I suppose, is mostly price driven at that point. Google Ads worked well initially, and then I said referral networks. So that was the kind of starting point, and we built off from there.
And then fast forward to today, what's the scale of the firm? Like team size, revenue?
Yeah, so team size, we have 5 professional staff, but as you said in the introduction, they're all part-timers. And we'll come back to our story in a minute because I think it's one of the founding philosophies of the firm, how and why we exist and why we do things, why we do them. But 5 professional staff, myself, and we've doubled revenue each year. So we did 250 in the first year, we did 500 in the second year, and we're on track for 1 million in the coming year. Yeah, fingers crossed, depending on marketing and the economy and all that kind of good stuff. But that's the ambition anyway, double revenue each year for the first couple of years.
And so digging into your talent acquisition and how you think about talent acquisition, why day one did you start with part-timers, and where are you finding this talent, right? I think there's a fear that you're not going to get the quality if you don't go after FTEs, or you're going to have to continually go back to the well and get another part-timer. So I'm curious, why was this a day one philosophy? And then how are you kind of building this pipeline? Or I don't know if you go to sites or have vendors that help with this, but I'd love to unpack that a bit more.
Yeah, fantastic. So look, there were 2 founding philosophies for the firm beyond wanting to give great advice to the SME market with, those big 4 experiences and large firm experiences. And the other 2 was the firm was built to be flexible. So I'd always had this dream, and it's still a dream, but living the dream, which is sitting by the beach, I'm able to work, or going skiing and taking a ski holiday for a month somewhere and taking the work with me, taking the firm with me. Hence why we built everything in the cloud from day one. And in some ways, COVID accelerated that process, obviously, but we'd already mapped that out before, or I'd already mapped that out before COVID hit. COVID just allowed the technology to catch up to the ambition, I suppose. So that was the first thing. The second one, on the people, that was the second founding philosophy. And I've got, small kids, a lot of my wife's friends, they all want part-time work, especially when the kids are really young, when 2, 3, 4 years old, preschool, even at school age. Sometimes the traditional firms in Australia, and it is changing, especially with the sort of talent drought we're having here, and I presume it's the same in the US, but, firms, particularly smaller firms, were not particularly flexible. I remember seeing an ad online for a firm, and it was something like, biz services, which is a typical accounting, tax, small SME stuff. We are a forward progressive firm, work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and we have a tie-free Friday. And I'm thinking, Jesus, that's what I did back in 1998 when I started, right? That's decades ago. So I built that philosophy around wanting a flexible working environment, and the part-timers came into it because I'd seen great people who couldn't get the jobs they wanted. So,
and how do you find is this, and are they paid on an hourly basis or on a per job or project basis?
No, literally they are permanent part-time workers. So
permanent part-time.
My staff work 3 days a week, most of them. And, from a quality perspective, I have found some fantastic people who are looking for part-time. So most of them are like they're people who've got, can work 9 till 2, 4 days a week, for example, because they've got kids in school. So they need to work school hours. They work 3 days a week because that fits in with their husband's job or their wife's job. We have one lady who's a return to work. She'd been out of the corporate workforce for about 10 years and wanted to come back. I was like, well, her daughter's gone into high school. So that makes all complete sense to me because these are highly talented people. They're intelligent people. They're driven. And that's the raw materials of what you need. So we found those people, we hire them. I don't see an issue at all with,
No, I'm wondering, so where are you finding, are there certain sites that focus on part-time work, or is this mainly coming through your network? Like, how have you been able to, sounds like the team you have, you're very passionate about, it sounds like they're really great. And so what are the lessons learned or even tactical tips, if the audience wants to engage us or thinking about permanent part-timers, how can they go about finding these people?
Yeah, so for us, again, there's several approaches. So we use I advertise on a website called seek.com, which you get us an Australian employment site, things like Indeed. I'm not sure what the US equivalents are, but there'll be equivalents over there, and just put up wanting part-time. That's been highly successful for us. I don't tend to use recruiters as much. Again, although I've had recruiters ring me with, here are people who want to work part-time, but that doesn't seem to work as well, unfortunately. The other ones are just Facebook sites. So we have one here. I live in Sydney, on the North Shore of Sydney. It's called the North Shore Moms, and it's a Facebook group aimed at women who live in the northern suburbs of Sydney, or in the northern suburbs of Sydney. You put an ad up there, and it's aimed. That's the kind of target audience I want to bring in. There's working mothers, effectively, because and indeed fathers too. Not that we have a father at the moment, but they're the sorts of mechanisms we use to get people on board.
Yeah. So the way I'm internalizing what you're saying is that, you got to approach it in the right way. You got to find the platforms or pockets where, people would be exploring part-time work. But the thing I'm also thinking about is it feels, with the big F, a lot less competitive to recruit like people that want to find meaningful, challenging part-time work in a remote setting within the finance and accounting industry is potentially less competitive than if you're going after, I think the classic folks people might target is that full-time employee status, exiting or a couple years out of school. And I think maybe that, a couple years of experience under their belt, they want full-time, and they're going to be running the gambit of where can I get the best offer? And that talent pool is actually decreasing, at least stateside it is. There's a lot of reports that it's decreasing. But on the flip side, folks that do want part-time work, like you said, because they're stay-at-home moms or dads, is probably increasing, right? Especially coming out of COVID, where you got used to this sense of, hey, I like being around my family a little bit more. It's created a lot of convenience in my life. And so I want to create a similar structure coming out of COVID. And so it feels like it's not as competitive to the general recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the economics part of it is obviously, a key driver. And to be perfectly blunt, when I first started out, I didn't have the client base to support an FTE full-time equivalent anyway. So I had to start hiring a part-timer as part of, as a firm grew, because like you said, it's less competitive. And the young 28-year-old who's got 3 or 4 years post-qualified experience, they look at a firm like mine, Big Four, mid-tiers, they're going to suck them up, because like if you're ambitious, you're going to want a career in a bigger firm. And quite frankly, I think you should have a big career in a bigger firm, because you'll learn a hell of a lot. So they're actually not the right people for us, because they're going to give a couple of years. The economics of it, the finances of it, the dollars are going to be a lot more. And, again, being perfectly blunt, there's thousands of small accounting firms in Sydney. Or in Australia, we've got a pretty unique client base and a pretty unique offering, but how do you track that? And I think just from the attraction perspective, we're better off, like I said, going for that pool of talent that has probably been being neglected for a long time, especially by more traditional, smaller firms.
Yeah. Do you think there's a point in which the part-time employment breaks down at a certain scale, or do you not see any sort of wall on the horizon? Do you feel like you can just keep scaling as you gear up for $1 million? Do you think you're still going to have a part-time staff, or do you see a change happening in the future?
I think there'll be a change. And in fact, we're actually in the process of offshoring a role at the moment, or hiring our first offshore role at the moment as part of our growth strategy. But the part-time perspective, we're actively looking at the moment for the next hire. Could I do this, to $1 million, to $2 million, to $5 million bucks? I reckon I can. If you think about it from the client perspective, the client just want great work done, when they want it done. They don't necessarily care that you work Monday, Thursday, Fridays, for example, right? And part of this is just being organized, getting your systems and processes in place so that you're not panicking that, the work has to be done on Tuesday and the person doesn't work on Tuesday, right? So part of this for us is how we set ourselves up in the cloud. As I said at my start, I'm not going to call you, I'm not going to ring you, I'm not going to text you on your day off unless it's really, really, really deadly urgent. But with any luck, we shouldn't need to, because if you've done everything right as an employee, got the right file notes there and got all the work, the system's up and running, the data and systems correctly, I will know where things are at, or the person who takes a call will know where things are at. So no, I don't see it capping out. There is one downside though to this part-time employees, and they cost a bit more, right? If you think about rent, for example, we have an office in Sydney, we're all there a couple of days a week. The rent doesn't change because we don't use it 1 or 2 days a week, for example. Software licenses, another good example. Yeah, software license is a monthly amount, right? It doesn't matter whether that person works 1 day a week or 7 days a week. So that pushes up the cost, if you look on a cost per hour basis a little bit, but I think that is worth the cost. Our training costs, our tax updates, for example, don't cost less just because somebody's working a few days, less a week. So the economics of it make it slightly more expensive, but it's definitely worthwhile the product can give at the other end.
Yeah, well, by extension and to segue, I know because before we only have so much time left, but I wanted to talk about, and you kind of alluded to this. So you don't have a printer, you've got a team of 5, scaling up $500,000, on track to 1 million. You don't have an admin person, you don't have a printer. So how are you thinking about the world of technology, automation, leverage? Because clearly you've done something. Either everything's a mess and your hair's completely on fire, or you've thought of you've designed a system that's allowed this level of scale without going insane.
Yeah, well, look, it's not easy, and there's a little data at the end of the day, right? I mean, the founding philosophy was I can work from anywhere. Again, of us can work from anywhere if we wish to. I've successfully had a family holiday up in Queensland where the family's been off the beach and I've managed to work for a week. That wasn't really a holiday, but they had a holiday. So, that was the design. So using the SaaS software is paramount for us, right? So, we're Xero, we're an XPM or Zero Practice Manager firm, which is very common in Australia. We use software like Jetpack Workflow, for example, to help track our jobs. The thing about all that is just making sure the data is tight. And I hammer my guys regularly on data and data issues because, for example, we set up a job in XPM. It's got a start date, it's got an end date, it's got a due date. If those things aren't put in correctly, the due date's not, for a tax return or a BAS, business activity statement, which the quarterly VAT reporting isn't put in properly, then we don't know, or I don't know that it's due tomorrow, for example, right? So making sure that data is tight is paramount to making this whole thing work. Everything's in Excel or PDFs that's stored in the cloud. And to be quite frank, I can't even imagine a firm that requires a printer and requires hard copy files. It just doesn't. Maybe I was out of the small business profession for too long because it was sort of 15 years between drinks for me being a small part of the firm. But I just can't imagine what that would look like and why you'd even bother printing anything off unless you're required to under some legal reason to have a wet ink signature.
Is there something? But is there something that you've done? Is it just the sitting back and having the discipline and thoroughness to say, like you said, you're very, very disciplined on how data gets put into the system. Is that the key variable that other firms might be missing? Or are there other things around your habits and behaviors that allow for you to kind of scale your technology systems?
I would say data is probably key to this and making sure that data integrity is, the thing that locks everything together. Because if we have common naming conventions, are just paramount, right? If we name our jobs differently in the software that doesn't natively talk to each other, it's going to fall apart. So we have standard naming conventions. I think you have to have staff who are comfortable with technology. Right? And again, we've had some staff turnover over the last couple of years, and sometimes they just don't get it, right? And how the technology works. And that's fine. Like that's not everyone's going to fit every firm. And I think it was just, I said from day one, it really was, we are doing this in the cloud because that's how we're going to operate. And so you pick the tools. A staff will tell me they hate it to do this, but I'm always experimenting with new tools and new bits of software because I love that sort of stuff. Right? How does the stuff fit in? Does it make our lives more efficient? How do we fit stuff together? We've got a central SharePoint site repository for all our processes, for example. I've got an internal YouTube video, Loom videos for how everything works. It's the philosophical thought on day one about how you set your firm up. Now, I don't have any experience, obviously, going from a fully manual firm through to automating it completely. I couldn't imagine how that would be a difficult journey, I suspect. We were lucky because we started with nothing on day one and built it from the ground up like this. But, if you were to take a firm that had been around 10, 15, 20 years and try and convert it into a fully cloud-based firm, I could see that's going to be an expensive, difficult exercise. You've got staff, you've got to retrain, you've got processes, you've got to rebuild. you've got software, you've got to learn. I mean, we use 8 or 9 pieces of software, not all of which talk to each other natively, which is a bit unfortunate, but we're getting better at linking that stuff together. And I think ultimately it is just a philosophy of, if this is how we are doing things. Like I said, then during COVID, I couldn't get to an office anyway, so I couldn't print things off because I didn't have a printer at home. So I had to do online. There was no choice, right?
Yeah. Well, James, this has been brilliant. I think it's really illuminated just, how you can take a slightly different approach to scaling up your firm and how you can be successful at it. If somebody wants to reach out, say thank you for coming on, connect with you, what is the best way for our audience to just even say thank you for coming on today?
Yeah, look, hit me up on LinkedIn or just at james@jdscott.co. Email's fine too. But like I said, any of those or through the website works as well.
We got connected through LinkedIn, right? I mean, obviously use Jetpack, so we're connected through Jetpack, but you hit me up on LinkedIn, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I've been listening to your podcast. I do a lot of triathlons, so I sit on my bike for a couple of hours a week listening to your podcast and watching your YouTube videos. So I thought this could be interesting. So that was how I hit you up.
I love it. Well, if this has resonated with you, but you didn't get to jot down all the notes, you can go to jetpackworkflow.com/blog, jetpackworkflow.com/blog. We're going to do a full write-up of James' story. If you enjoyed this interview, leave a 5-star review. Help us get the word out. If you really loved it, share it with a fellow firm owner that needed to hear this. And I'll throw out a bonus call to action. If you heard James' story and you're like, hey, I might have an interesting story, do what James did. Hit me up on LinkedIn, send me an email, david@jetpackworkflow.com. I would say, past couple episodes, we've had people reach out and say, you know what, I've hit this milestone in my business. I think it's really interesting. I'd love to come on the pod and talk about it. If that's you and you're listening and you're hesitating at all, do what James did. Hit me up. Come on the show. We'd love to talk about, operating in the trenches and how you're succeeding. James, this has been a true blast to have you on. Thank you so much for reaching on. And thanks again for coming on today's show.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.